friends, welcome back to my channel. We're here today to talk a little bit about the books that I read in January. I was originally going to combine this video with book links, but I'm going to make a separate video that comes after this where I try to link all my books to see if there are themes that continue from one book to the next. And so yeah, they're going to be two separate videos. I originally intended for this to be a much shorter video, but as I went through, so I'm filming the intro after I filmed the video, because in my intro I said I was going to do book links, and then I realized that it would make this video way too long. So in this video, I'm only going to be talking about the books that I read in January. Not going to go into too much detail, but I did read 15 books. I want to mention them. I'll link in the description box down below each of my Friday Reads videos where I talk a little bit about the books that I've finished during the week. So those videos will have a little bit more detail, a little bit more discussion of the books. Here, I'm only going to mention them for completeness because I think it's good to have a place where I just kind of wrap up all the books that I read in the month. But if you want a little bit more detail in the books that I've already discussed, then go check out the links down below so you can hear more thoughts on those. So stay tuned as I chat a little bit about all the books that I read in January. First book that I read in January was actually from my TBR. I have this long list of books, classics and backlists that I need to get to. But I also want to reread some things that I know I've read but can't remember. So one of the first things that I did this year was reread Jane Austen's Persuasion, and I loved it. This is, Jane Austen, and this is a booktuber before there was booktube. So Anne Elliot is the main character, and she's a middle daughter in a family that is strange. They're eclectic, they're obsessed with other things, but Anne is very different. So she's a beautiful main character, and she's bookish. You could tell from the cover, and she gives big book recommendations to people that she meets, and it's just fantastic to read about. So that was the first book that I finished in January, and I'm planning to reread all Jane Austen's novels, so let's say we're starting there. The second book I read in January was a new release called The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave, which follows a woman who's in her probably late 30s, early 40s, and she's gotten married recently to a man who had a daughter before, and he disappears, and she has to figure out, one, where he's gone, and two, whether or not he's coming back, and three, what she's supposed to do about the fact that he has left her to be a step-parent to a child who doesn't necessarily want her around. And it's a little bit of a discussion of later in life romance, and it's delightful. It's great. I love Laura Dave's writing. I have read almost all the books that she has released thus far. I think I have one that I missed out, and I'm going to go back and read it because I love her novels and would highly recommend it if you like books about romance and books just about how women deal with issues. Love this book. Love it. It's a little bit of a detective kind of mystery, solving a mystery given almost no clues. There's that as well, and I'm here for all of that kind of writing. Book number 3 for me was The Catcher in the Rye by Jd Salinger, and this was about a prep school student, a boy going to school in Pennsylvania, but he's from New York, and when he's about to get kicked out of school because his grades are terrible, he decides to just leave school. Kind of gets into a little bit of trouble. He decides to just leave school without his parents knowing and go to New York and kind of live out fantasies that children, I suppose, indulge in. So it's a little bit of following him around as he goes around New York City and lives out some of those dreams, and you get to see what happens when kids have more money than morals, or more money than limits, or something like that. And I really enjoyed that one as well. Book number 4 for me was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Gilman Perkins, and this was a short read. It's about a woman who is having some mental issues. It seems as though she is experiencing postpartum syndrome or postpartum depression, and her husband is her physician, and he prescribes a rest cure for her. So she's put into this room in a house that's not where she usually lives, not her usual room, and she's being attacked by the wallpaper. And it's about how she's hiding and writing down her thoughts and communicating to the reader exactly what's happening, what she's envisioning, and later what is actually happening. And this was fantastic. So I think I talked about that in the video, so go watch what I had to say about that one. Next, I read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and Marie Kondo is a Japanese decluttering and organization expert. And this was the first of her books where she wrote about sparking joy with the things that you own. So if there are things in your house that is cluttering up your life that don't make you feel joyful, get rid of those things so you can focus on the things that do spark joy. And so this is a book that I've read before and try to reread, every now and then, because I like her message. There are some things that she says in this book that I feel like they don't necessarily apply to me. Like she says, you should only have 30 books. Like, clearly, I don't even have 30 books on each shelf. Like, my shelves are all weighed down. So clearly I'm not following Marie Kondo and her advice to a T. But I like what she says about making room in your life for the things that make you feel good, the things that elevate your mood. And that's a message that just resonates with me. And so I reread that book every now and then, looking for that advice. I'm yet to put into practice what she teaches, but the book is great. Then I read Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor. And this was another short-ish read, focusing on an older main character. It's a woman in her 70s, I think, and she's recently widowed, and so she goes to live in this hotel. And it's about the relationships that she forms there, both in the hotel and outside, because she meets this young man and the relationship that they start, and about the development of that part of her life. And it is a wonderful read. Like, I gave this a 5-star rating just because the author gives us a really sympathetic main character and other characters around her that are of varying degrees of sympathy, or that earn varying degrees of sympathy from us. Like, there are some that are just there for humor, and some that I think you're supposed to hate them, but you could tell that they're perfectly placed for that. And then there's this character who we're not sure how we feel about them. And that level of ambiguity goes on until the end, but it's resolved in a really beautiful way. And so I love this writing. So highly recommend Elizabeth Taylor's Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. If you haven't yet read it, go check it out. After that, I read Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is the first in a series which I intend to dip into probably in middle grade March. Anne of Green Gables is not originally from Green Gables. She's from somewhere else. A young girl who's orphaned, and this brother and sister, older people, are looking for a kid to come and help them on their farm, and they intend to get a boy, but they end up with a little girl. And how she just worms her way into their hearts and the hearts of the people in her community and into the reader's heart, and how she interprets the things around her with such clarity. But she's supposed to be innocent, and she's supposed to be rambling and dreamy, but she's just perfect. Like, she's a perfect kid for you to dote on. And I love that her guardian is stern with her because she doesn't want to spoil her. And I feel like that's the way to not let this kid like get too immersed in herself. But it's just like you could understand if someone spoiled her, because she seems like she's deserving of it. But this book was fantastic. So if you haven't yet read Anne of Green Gables, like me, a month ago, go read Anne of Green Gables. It is a book, if you ever have like a book hangover, or you're in a reading slump, or you're not sure what to read next, that's a book I think you could pick up at any point and just enjoy it. So the book I read after that was Her Secret War by Pam Lecky. I'm not even showing you books, right? Because all of those books that I just mentioned were e-copies. So then I read Her Secret War by Pam Lecky. This is an arc that I got from the publishers. This one followed a main character who was living in Ireland when Ireland was bombed by Germany in the beginning of World War II. So this happens in 1941. And we see this young woman leave home and go to England because of the change in her family situation. I really enjoyed this because I feel like it gave a little bit of a unique perspective on the war. Like, I didn't know about Irish involvement in World War II. And this gave me a little bit of that backstory about the suspicion and the discrimination that Irish people felt, because England wasn't sure whether or not they could trust them. And of course, I mean, there were also people from Ireland who were very divided on whether or not they should fight with England because of the history of wars between Ireland and England, or whether they should go side with Germany. So this I thought was really interesting for that background. Then I read On a Night Like This by Lindsay Kelk, another arc that I got from the publishers. And this one had a main character in England who was in a relationship, an engagement that wasn't going anywhere. And it's a little bit of her coming out of that relationship and finding a little bit more of herself, finding a little bit more of her own path, and then a new romance, a new relationship. But the focus wasn't so much on the new romance, it was on this main character opening up herself to new experiences and to living the way she wants, to not just to please other people. And I thought it was interesting because she was working as a personal assistant, and not only with one person, but she was working as a temp personal assistant, so she would have one boss after another. And I thought that that was really interesting because I feel like assistants have to kind of temper themselves and temper their own personalities because of who they work with. And if you're constantly moving from one person that you're assisting to another, then doesn't that impact who you are? So I felt like that was an interesting way to kind of show this main character needing to figure out what she wanted out of life, even if she sometimes had to switch things back and forth for the people she was working for. So I thought that that was interesting. So I like this book a lot. I read this short story collection called Shapeshifting by Michelle Ross, and this one focused on motherhood and the different ways that a woman could be a mother. So we saw stories of women who had biological children. We had women who had adopted children. We had grandmothers. We had women who wanted to have children and who had experienced loss, whether loss of a pregnancy or loss of a baby after the baby had been born. And also women who had maternal instincts, I suppose, but didn't necessarily have children and didn't want them. And I thought it was really interesting way to look at motherhood from all these different perspectives and see how motherhood transforms women, and as well as how it transforms relationships that children come into. And I love this short story collection as well. Next, I read Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood. This was about a teenage girl who's working as an exorcist, and she's working for a man whose house has been haunted, his family has been killed, and he's just trying to get these evil spirits out of his life, out of his home, so he can move on and go inherit the life that was supposed to be left for him. And I loved a lot of things about this book because we got a glimpse into that fantasy world where exorcisms are necessary. Like, that's a world that I don't want to live in. I don't want to be there. I wouldn't want to be anywhere close to where this is happening. And this is also a little bit of a Jane Eyre retelling or reimagining. And I like how the author gave a little bit of that Jane Eyre Victorian setting, but also gave a lot more current relevance to this story. So like that one as well. Then I read Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. I read that online. So Ethan Frome is about a man called Ethan Frome living in Starkfield, Massachusetts. And this is a really atmospheric book because it feels like everything happens in winter, like when no one can really go anywhere. People make decisions that are not the same decisions they would make if it was, warm and sunny outside. We have a main character who left school to come back to take care of his parents when they got ill. And as his family declined, he had a cousin who came to stay with them. And then he married her because when his mother died, he was afraid of being alone in the house. And so he married this woman, even though he didn't necessarily love her. And then later he finds the woman that he would rather he had married, but he can't do anything about it because he's already married. So it's a little bit of an adulterous situation, a little bit of a love triangle. And Ethan Frome, who is probably the most unromantic character, is at the center of this triangle. So Ethan Frome, the story, is more than just the life of this character. It's also about how we make decisions. And our circumstances and how they impact us. And yeah, not a happy story, but a really interesting one. So then I read The Long Song by Andrea Levy. This was a Run Right Reads book club selection for January. And this one was an older woman writing about her life story when she was an enslaved woman in Jamaica in the 1800s. And the interruptions that both she and her son, who is supposed to be kind of helping to edit her, both of how they interrupt each other and communicate directly to the reader. And I was here for this story of a woman coming out of slavery and being able to actually write her story down, because a lot of women who were enslaved, a lot of people who were enslaved never got a chance to tell their own story because they had been illiterate and without access for so long that even after slavery was abolished, their lives didn't really change much. This was a really heart-wrenching story to read because there are some details here that are like, there's just no euphemism. They're tough. They're tough to read. They're tough to experience, even third hand as you're reading this novel. But it's also such an important story, and the way that Andrea Levy tells it gives you the heart of the story without always dwelling on the emotions. So I'm going to be discussing this in a little bit more detail in an upcoming video where I talk about the book club selection. So more on that later. But for now, I love this. Then I read For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And this is a choreo poem by Ntozake Shange. And this was hard. I've watched the movie adaptation, and reading the poem is no less intense. So I'm going to recommend it if you haven't ever read this poem. It's a choreo poem, so the book is a poem. It's a series of poems, but it's also like a play, and it's just like a one-act play where the characters come on and off stage and tell you what they have to tell you and just like break your heart and then leave you to deal with it. And it's about the lives of Black women anytime, anywhere, because a lot of it is about the experiences of Black women, but it's also the universal pain of women and some of the hardships, some of the struggles that women endure. And more on that later. Yeah. That was almost the last book, but it wasn't, because I'd been reading this book for a while and I finally finished it. So this is the last book that I finished in January, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is as different from For Colored Girls as you could get. So book links is going to be interesting. But Jack Kerouac's On the Road follows a young white man in the 1940s and coming out of a relationship, how he seeks to kind of latch on to someone new, and he meets this young man, and the relationship that they have as they go on the road chasing each other across the continent multiple times. So it's a series of road trips. It's a series of recordings of details of the trips and the people that they meet and the things they eat and where they eat and what they don't and where they sleep and why they don't. And it's 300 pages of road tripping, and over that time you get to see who these characters are, how they reveal themselves to us by the things they do and the things they don't. And I'm going to tell you more about this in an upcoming video. But this is a lot. It's really intense, and I could tell why the people who love this book love it, and I could also tell why the people who don't like this book, why they feel that way, because it gives you a lot, and I don't know how to condense that other than to say more on this later. Those were 15 books that I read in January, and I'm really excited about that number because, one, I didn't meet my number goal last year. I didn't read all the books that I wanted to read last year, and this year I'm trying to do better, just trying to be a little bit more, try to stay with my goals. All the books that I read in January weren't necessarily on my January TBR, but they were all books that I wanted to read for one reason or another. So that was really cool. And most of the books that I read were by female authors. Of the 15 books, 13 of them were by women, and they were from various genres, various countries, various times, various kinds of experiences. So that was fun. So that was a fantastic reading month, I think. Would love to know in the comments down below how your January reading went. Leave me a comment down there. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's chat in the comments, and until next time, happy reading.